Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reality Roundtable. I'm your host, Jonathan Brown. And let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you're showing up for people, you're putting in effort, and you're doing your part, and something still just feels off? Like you're there, but you're not really being valued. You're included, but you're not really being appreciated. Almost like you're being tolerated instead of being genuinely wanted. And that feeling, it's a subtle feeling, but it's a powerful one. And if you ignore it long enough, it'll start to mess with how you see yourself. So today, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the signs and the truth behind it, and mostly what you should do about it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode. So let's start with the signs because they aren't always obvious. Nobody walks up to you and says, "Hey, we don't really value you like that." It just shows up in patterns. And one of the biggest ones is unnoticed effort. You ever go out of your way for someone and it's like it just doesn't even register? No thank you, no acknowledgement, nothing. And at first you brush it off. You tell yourself, maybe they're just busy. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But then it just keeps happening. And that's not a one time thing, it's the standard that's been set. Another sign, you keep getting passed up for opportunities. Now, this one could hit deep, especially in work. You're qualified, you're present, and you're putting in effort. But somehow, when it's time to choose, you're never the one that gets chosen. And what makes it worse is sometimes they won't even explain why you weren't chosen. So now you're left sitting there thinking, what am I missing? And let me be honest with you. Sometimes it's not about what you're missing, it's about how others see you. Another one, another sign is you only receive negative criticism, no constructive feedback. Have you ever noticed how people only speak up when something's wrong, but when you're doing something right, there's silence? That's not growth, that's imbalance. Because real support looks like, hey, you did this well, but here's where you can improve on. That right there is constructive criticism, not just this isn't good enough. But let's go deeper for a second because this isn't just about what people do, it's about how it feels. And one major sign of that is they're never available. And I'm not saying that people have to be on call 24/7. No. Because there's a big difference between, hey, I'm busy right now, and I never have time for you. Consistency matters because if somebody wants to make time for you, they will. Another sign that you may be only being tolerated instead of being valued is that there's no reciprocity. And this is huge. Think of it like this: you're always the one checking in on people, you're always the one reaching out, and you're always the one showing up. And the people who you're doing that for, they just receive it. But on their end, there's no effort to match your energy, there's no initiative. And after a while, it can start to feel one sided because it is one sided. And here's a big one: everything tends to seem transactional. Like there's nothing genuine. It's always, I'll do this if you do that. Or they only show up when they need something. That's not connection, that's convenience. And if you're honest, you can feel the difference. You don't have to guess. So let's talk about something that doesn't get called out enough, and that's respect. Because when somebody truly values you, you don't have to question whether they respect you or not. Because when they don't, it shows up in small ways. They don't respect your time. And examples of that are they cancel last minute, they show up late, or they don't follow through. And you're always brushing it off like it's no big deal. Another thing that you have to pay attention to is when they undermine you, but not directly, but in a subtle way. And this one right here could be tricky because it's not always obvious. It may sound like jokes, little comments, or backhanded compliments. Stuff like, oh, you actually did a good job this time. Or, I didn't expect that from you. And they say that with a smile, but in your heart and in your mind, you know it doesn't feel right. And here's the truth about that: if you have to keep questioning whether somebody respects you or not, there's a problem. Now, let's talk about another thing in this episode, and that is why we tend to stay in situations in which we are not valued. If the signs are there, why do we stay? Why do we keep showing up to these places where we're not valued? And a big reason for that is familiarity. Even if it's not good for us, it's what we're used to. And the thought of starting over is uncomfortable. Another reason we tend to stay in situations that no longer serve us is because we tend to have hope that the situation will get better and that the situation will eventually change. And sometimes it does change for the better, but a lot of those times it doesn't. And have you ever been in situations where you start questioning yourself? You start thinking, maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I'm overreacting. But let me tell you this: expecting respect, consistency, and genuine effort, that's not asking for too much. That's literally just asking for the bare minimum. So let's talk about the moment where you realize that you being valued clicks. And it's not a loud moment and it's not dramatic, but it is clear. It's a moment where you sit back and think, yeah, something's not right. Maybe it's when you stop reaching out and no one notices. You don't get any texts, calls, or no, hey, how are you? It just goes dead silent. And that can say more than any words could. Or it could be when you actually needed support and then suddenly there's no one around. But let it be the other way around. You be expected to show up instantly. And that moment right there, that's clarity. And it's uncomfortable because you can't unsee it. So let's talk about what this does to you over time. Because it isn't about how it affects relationships, it's about how it starts affecting you. Now, let's talk about what this does to you over time. Because it isn't just about how it affects relationships, it's about how it starts affecting you. First, you start shrinking yourself. You start talking less, you start sharing less, and you show up less. And it's not because that's who you are, it's because you learn that your presence isn't being fully received. Secondly, you overthink everything, every text, every interaction, every response. You start asking yourself, did I say something wrong? Am I doing too much? And am I not doing enough? And that right there can be exhausting because now, instead of you being yourself, you're constantly adjusting yourself to fit in the space where you're not even being valued. And the worst part about all that is your confidence starts to take a hit. But it's not all at once. It starts to happen slowly. Because when you're in spaces that you're not being valued, you start to question your own value. Because your environment will either reinforce your confidence or it will slowly break it down. And this part right here is something that a lot of people get confused. There's a difference between being needed and being valued. Some people keep you around because you're useful. You help them, you support them, and you show up when they need something. But the question is, would they still choose you if you stopped being useful to them? That's how you tell the difference. Because when somebody values you, it's not about what you do, it's about who you are. They don't just hit you up when they need something, they check on you just because. They include you intentionally and they appreciate you consistently. And once you experience that real value, you'll never be comfortable being tolerated again. So let's get practical. because awareness without action doesn't change anything. You have to start setting boundaries, and I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but you have to set boundaries and actually follow through with them. And the boundary can be as simple as not always being available, not always saying yes to people, and not always over explaining yourself. But when it comes to all that, here's a part that people struggle with. You have to do it without feeling any guilt. Because when you start moving differently, people will notice. They might say that you've changed, you're acting different, or you don't come around as much as you used to. And you know what? They would be right, actually. You did change. But what they're really reacting to is the fact that they no longer have the same access to you. And that's okay, because access to you should be based on how you're treated, not just the history that you have with somebody. And here's something that a lot of people don't discuss. Not every situation needs a big ending, because sometimes you don't need a long explanation, you don't need closure from them, and you don't need a final conversation. Sometimes you just need to move differently. You need to stop over investing your time. You need to stop over explaining yourself. And you need to stop chasing after people. And naturally, doing all those things will create distance between you and others. But the truth is, some connections only survive when you're the one holding them together. And when you stop, that connection will fall apart. So instead of trying to fix it, you let it show you what it really is. Now let's flip this, because this isn't just about what you walk away from, it's about what you start accepting moving forward. You start raising your standards, and not in a superficial way, but in a real way. You start to pay attention to consistency, effort, respect, and energy. You stop ignoring red flags just because you see potential. And you stop trying to prove your worth to people who already decided not to see it. Because the right people, you won't have to convince them. They'll see you, they'll respect you, and they will value you. And they'll do it without you having to fight for it. So let me leave you with this. If you feel like you're being tolerated, there's a reason for that. That feeling isn't random, it's awareness. And once you become aware, you have a choice. You can either keep showing up the same way, hoping things will change, or you can start choosing better environments that actually reflect your worth. At the end of the day, this isn't about cutting people off, or being cold towards others, or shutting yourself out from the world. It's about being in alignment. It's about being in spaces where You don't feel like you have to prove yourself. You don't feel overlooked. And you don't feel like an afterthought. But instead, you feel seen, respected, and valued. And once you experience that, you won't settle for anything less. So take a moment and reflect on your circle and be honest with yourself. Are you being valued or are you just being tolerated? And that's the end of the episode, everybody. I'm your host, Jonathan Brown, and I'll see you on the next episode next week, Wednesday at 12 p.m. Y'all have a good one.